One question I get asked all the time: how do you upgrade a build? How do you take it from basic gear that gets you into red maps to something that's min-maxed? And part of the problem in answering this is, it depends. For example, if you're the sort of person who just wants to farm a bunch of currency, maybe you play an MF build, and then you buy items, your best upgrade path is single-step upgrades, going from that kind of junk 20 chaos item that you picked up that sort of works for red maps, all the way up to an 8 or 9 exalt upgrade. The reason you want to do this as quickly as possible with as few steps in between is you're buying it and paying whatever price the market asks. This is a problem because very often you lose money doing this. So if you were to upgrade it over 5 or 6 steps, well, that 8 exalt item might actually cost you 12 or even 15. On the other hand, if you're an SSF, you have limited resources, so you're going to upgrade things far more incrementally. You're going to say, alright, I know I can make my boots better by rolling it with essences. I have 3 essences. I'm going to use these on a base. Alright, well I got something that's slightly better than my current boots, so I'll use them. And then you're going to do that again and again until you finally get what you're happy with. So it's often very difficult to lay out a strict upgrade path for people. I can talk about how an item's created or why I'm using an item, but very rarely can I say, you should do this in this exact way. Instead, I'm going to talk about some general rules that I use for upgrading my builds. I tend to craft items. I tend to live search items. I don't have any issues doing multi-step upgrades. I can sell the things that I make for profit. And I also don't have an issue jumping to one big item, because I can always farm and save up and do that. Regardless of how you get to the goal, the first thing you need to do is look at your current gear and look at what is a problem. So I'm going to use a build as an example here. Then I'm going to talk about some problems that might come up, and how I might solve them. An example of a problem would be, I keep dying to chaos damage. Well, your chaos res is the problem. You're going to need to up that. And you need to look at your gear to see, well, I have a helmet that doesn't have any chaos res, but it also has an elevated mod. That's going to be very costly to replace, so you don't want to do that. On the other hand, you might have a ring that's 50 life crafted on and 60 res, that you picked up around level 70 and just kind of forgot about because it did its job. But it would be doing that job a lot better with chaos res on it. And that upgrade shouldn't be exorbitant. It should be something easily achievable. So that's what you'd focus on first, and leave the more expensive thing until later. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the build that I league started with. The Explosive Arrow Slayer. This is going to be something that I personally swapped over to Ellie Hit, but today I'm going to talk about how you'd go about upgrading the gear if you wanted to do so and if you wanted to keep min-maxing the build. I won't give exact prices for things because they're going to change. Instead, I'm going to talk about crafting methods, and I will give a price that's saying like, well, this costs 3 exalts to benchcraft, because that's not going anywhere. My hope of this video is you can apply this to your own builds, and even if the skill you're playing, or the mechanics you're using, or the items you're upgrading change, the idea will still remain the same. But before I continue, informational videos like this tend to be a lot less popular than build guides, or skill showcases with a lot of flashy visuals. Personally, I think these are some of the videos that help people the most. The problem with this is, if it never gets promoted in the YouTube algorithm, then no one sees it and it can't help anyone. So if you find this helpful, or you want to see more videos like this, please do share it with a friend. Leave a like on the video and let me know down in the comments below. The better the video does, the easier it's going to be for me to make more in the future. Alright, so the character is level 93. It has all of the gear that I had on when I finished playing the build. Overall, there aren't that many problems to solve here. So one of the things that does stand out is the chaos res is pretty low. Let's start with that and then move on to other things, as the chaos res was something that I felt was pressing. One other thing that might be worth looking into is the hit chance. At 99%, it's not perfect, but this isn't nearly as big of a deal as having negative 1% chaos res. Now, a lot of my chaos res already comes from my belt. This could be made a little bit better, but the build is utilizing the strength and the max life is good, so let's put that off to the side for now. Instead, I'd rather talk about the boots, because the boots don't really offer very much. They've got a mediocre spell suppression roll, mediocre movement speed, and just life. This is where there's a lot of room for upgrade. Now, when it comes to replacing these, I would say there's 2 approaches. The approach number 1 is just buy a solution. This is really easy. You'd just get spell suppression, move speed, life, and chaos res. This will be probably 3-4x. So if you have the money and you don't want to think, that's what you could do. You could also roll it with Deafening Essence of Envy. This would get you Tier 1 Chaos Res. You can roll it about 20-30 times till you get a good spell suppression roll. Hopefully you have another useful suffix. Then you'd fix the prefixes with the new crafting currencies. If you want to see more about that, I have a video which will be down in the description below and in the card right now. Or of course, you could use fossils. One of the best ways to do this is actually just to block with Frigid and Scorched. This removes all of the fire modifiers and all of the cold modifiers, meaning you're likely to get lightning res, spell suppression, chaos res, life, and move speed, as those don't have any of those tags. If you want to get a little bit fancier, you could even encourage life rolls and block defensive rolls by using a pristine fossil. But that might get you some unwanted life regen suffixes, which doesn't really help this build that much as you do also have leech. Not terrible though, so consider that an option as well. So now let's make the item that's going to be roughly what you end up with. This won't be perfect, I'm just going to put in some numbers, but it should at least be somewhat usable. I'm going to say you end up with Tier 4 Lightning Res, of course Tier 1 Chaos Res, as that's what we're trying to fix, and I'm going to say Tier 2 Spell Suppression, as that's a lot more common than Tier 1. Overall, this is pretty good, and you can even craft a little bit more life on it, like so. So now the boots have been upgraded, we've got a lot more chaos res, this should solve problems in the build. We also now have higher lightning res, which means we don't necessarily need more res elsewhere, which opens up other items for upgrading. And this is where things get important. It's very often the case that you upgrade one thing and you have to change others in your build. So now that we have a little more res, this neck is really good to start with, but not amazing. What might you be able to do that's a lot better? Well, you could do something like Ashes of the Stars. It's a very popular option. You could also do Crystallized Omniscience and deal with that whole mess. But I'm going to go with something else. I'm going to go with Leadership's Price. This will be an expensive upgrade. This is one of those things that the cost is unavoidable because you can't just go get it. It's a boss drop, and there's no way around that. I'm going to say you have decent but not perfect rolls, and so there we go. This might open up other problems, like now we're a bit dumb. We can fix those as we've now opened up stats elsewhere. Our res should be pretty good. I'm going to turn off flasks just to make sure. And yeah, even with flasks off, res is still totally fine, but we might have to look at something like fixing chaos res further. To use Leadership's Price, we need to lose some of the dex, and we need to get more of the int. Now, to make a long story short, the best way to do this is to switch the skill tree up entirely, to use something that more or less mirrors what I'm using for Elemental Hit currently, so I'm just going to import that tree over, and this is where your research would come in. You wouldn't necessarily know what the ideal tree for Leadership's Price is, but you might be able to find someone else who's using it, and you might be able to borrow theirs. So I'm just going to import this and overwrite the current tree, and all of a sudden, it's not perfect, we're still a little short on int, and we don't quite have the strength and dex balanced. This will also change when we drop the avatar fire stuff over here, but overall we're in a much better place to keep iterating. One thing to do quickly is to put elemental equilibrium back, as that's a very significant damage boost. This means there's a little more freedom to drop all this stuff over here. While this stuff is nice, it's much better if you actually need avatar fire, which we of course don't. We can also easily drop the combat focus jewels, because again, those are good if you need avatar fire, which we don't. So I'm just going to take a little bit of time and clean up the tree here. Alright, now that I've cleaned up the tree a bit, it's time to fix the problem. The problem being that we still have a lot more dex and not enough strength. So one way to do this is just convert a bunch of dex to strength, which you can do very easily with an inertia jewel. If you're looking for a way to get corrupted blood immunity, this is a perfect solution, as these generally aren't very expensive. Now you can play with the rules a little bit. It might be harder to get a perfect one, but for now, I'm going to do that. Now it's 243, 248, a difference of 5. And this is a lot easier to fix than we had previously. In fact, just a simple suffix here will easily fix the problem. Alright, so now that I've replaced the cluster jewel, it is 248, 248. We've now upgraded this to enable Leadership's Price. So the enemy is not going to be ignited anymore. This means that we're losing some damage and we'll have to fix our links. That's fine though, because they're now scorched, they're now brittle, and they're now sapped. I'm going to put in some theoretical numbers here. I don't know that these are actually correct. I'm just going to put it at about 75% power. With how hard Explosive Arrow hits in a single hit, I think 100% is more than reasonable, especially with things like non-damaging ailment effect. This is an example of how your upgrades kind of compound on each other, and they end up getting better and better as time goes on. Because you might have noticed our average damage is quite high now. In fact, not only that, but we're crit capped, and we don't have Overwhelm anymore. Instead, we swapped it over to Masterful Form. This means that Endurance Charges will offer even more defensive benefits. Remember, this build can easily sustain Power, Frenzy, and Endurance Charges because of its mechanics. Now, you might have some problems with mana cost of skills. That is something that changed. If you do, you can always throw in a Replica Conqueror's Efficiency, as there is a nice open jewel socket. But then again, it's also 3 mana, so maybe it's not that big of an issue. From here, we can always put in another jewel, so I'm just going to copy this Soul Pause for now. It's not a perfect solution, you're probably not going to find 2 of the same jewel. It's good enough though, and we've got quite a bit of damage that we didn't have before. This also means that we don't necessarily need the Quill Rain. We have kind of ridiculous attack speed. Oftentimes, when you fix one thing in your build, it lets you fix other things as well. It can introduce more problems, but in this case, I'd say we're doing pretty good. We even get to drop Combustion here, which gives us a little bit more flexibility in what is largely a lot of utility links. For now, I'm just going to put in damage because I don't really see any other problems that we need to solve at the moment. For now, maybe I'll just put something like Awaken Fire Penetration because it's good damage. We don't really need this, so you could always switch it to something that offers more utility. Remember, we don't really need the exposure because we've already got it via EE, and we've got a very strong version of it. So now it's time to look at some of the other gear and see what might be lacking. The helmet's already quite good. Obviously, the 6.1 life regen per second is a fairly dead suffix. You could always get better. But I don't think this is something that I would target for an upgrade personally. Maybe if you say, hey, I want a nearby minus 12 helmet, something that's an elevated mod and fairly expensive, that would be a significant upgrade. But until you're ready to have that level of expenditure, this isn't really going to be a huge priority. For similar reasons, right now our chest piece is really good, it offers a ton of life, and it offers decent res and spell suppression. You could make something better. In fact, I did end up making something better when I played this build for myself, but you don't need to. I don't think there's really a big problem to fix here, although getting more chaos res would be helpful. And same with the Armageddon Paw. There's minor upgrades we could do. We could fix the implicits and make them a little bit better. The lightning damage to attacks is actually quite relevant. That enables EE. It's already got cold and chaos res, so this is good. And even the quiver's pretty good. So these are all things that while there's room for upgrade, I don't think it's feeling like a pressing issue. What I do feel is pretty pressing would be this ring. The Soul Eye is already very good. It's got elemental damage of attacks, it's got 2 res, it's got life, it's got an open prefix, and it's got recoup. The Stormband, on the other hand, is again very lacking. We're using the int. We're also using the accuracy to an extent, though much less so now that we have 2 jewels. The life and the recoup is good, but this isn't a complete item. It's basically just missing a suffix, and that suffix could be chaos res. So how I'd go about this is I'd just buy a new ring. The stats might not be quite identical. In fact, it might not have the accuracy, but for the sake of things, I'm just going to edit the ring, and I'm going to pretend the accuracy goes away, and instead we end up with chaos res. So just like that, we've done a lot to significantly fix our build. Again, there's a little bit of accuracy missing, and the real way you'd solve that is probably by replacing something like this. We don't need the res anymore, and we don't need the damage to attacks because it's on gloves. This is how the upgrade process works, where you get to say, hey, that was good at one point, it got me through a time where I needed it, but I don't anymore. So I'm going to say Searching Eye Jewel. Obviously, life is important. Something else as a prefix would be nice, maybe mana, maybe damage, maybe armor or evasion. None of this really matters, though. I'm just going to pretend that it ended up with a little cold damage to bow attacks. You could also pretend it does, or you could say, don't really care. From there, we're going to want accuracy rating, and ideally something like crit multi, That might be a little bit greedy though, so instead I'm just going to say attack speed. Attack speed isn't super highly valuable, and this fixes everything, so we're still in a really good spot. We've got the int we need. We're set up for leadership's price. Our res is looking way better. That's a problem that's definitely solved. Our evasion rating's looking okay. It's going to be higher in-game. The evasion chance will be lower, at least if you're not using Vival Grace. Obviously, flasks are doing a lot of work there. And a lot of our gear's looking like it's in a pretty good spot. Like, you're ready to make the big leap rather than the small one. I will give an example of how you'd make a big leap and how you'd put together an item that's far more valuable. But before I do that, I want to upgrade the bow. This is going to be something that's a more involved crafting process. Quillrain does an amazing job for how cheap it is, and Explosive Arrow loves attack speed, so it's a really good fit. But you can do better. Now, I'm going to suggest using an Imperial bow, not because it's necessarily the best option, but because due to the div card, there's a lot more availability. The reason availability matters is I don't advise just crafting this by yourself. I advise buying a base, maybe crafting a little bit by removing prefixes, and going from there. The most important thing is bow attacks fire additional arrows and a decent attack speed roll. It doesn't have to be exactly tier 2, that's just what I picked. Something like this, last I checked, was 4 to 6 exalts, so this is going to be a fairly expensive upgrade. Again, by the time you're watching this video, it could be 1x or it could be 10. Prices change. If you wanted, you could try to alt spam Alt-Og Regal. You want to always stop on the rarest possible mod, which is the bow attacks fire additional arrows. From here, we're going to use some vendor crafting. So the first thing you do is craft can have multiple crafted modifiers. The reason you want this is you want to keep all these suffixes intact, and you want to put a really nice prefix on it. So now we do, suffixes cannot be changed. Note, typing cuffixes cannot be changed does not give you the results that you want. Now that you have this, these suffixes, including the multimod, will be locked in place. Up until this point, you've already spent 3x, so this isn't very cheap, but this is going to give you an incredibly powerful endgame item. And then you'd use a Veiled Chaos to add a Veiled Prefix. Now there's a lot of variance here. If you look at the Veiled Prefixes that can roll on a bow, physical damage is pretty common. You don't really want that. You could attempt to block that by, after doing the suffixes cannot be changed and applying the Veiled Chaos, crafting fizz damage. But if you do, you're going to have to re-multimod every single time, which adds a lot of cost. Personally, I think it's probably worth it in this case, as it does significantly reduce the number of prefixes that a bow specifically can roll. Remember, all this stuff right here, this fizz damage, it's gone. So you'll get something like lightning or fire as extra chaos as an option. What you really want, though, is attacks this weapon penetrate 4 to 16% elemental resistances. This is going to be a massive upgrade over the Quillrain, as it's going to mean your explosive arrow hits so much harder. To go beyond this, then this is gone, and you end up like this. So you remove this, and you add cannot roll attack mods. And then you slam it, because that's the only way to guarantee +1 gems. Now, from here, you're already in a really good spot. Your bow has 2 prefixes and 2 suffixes. You've spent a minimum of 4 exalts just on bench crafts, probably more given that you probably had to buy the bow. Finally, you finish it off with +2 to level of socketed support gems. This is going to enable you to switch to an Empower setup for your main links, which is the best possible DPS. So, +2 to socketed supports. If you really wanted to finish it, let's say you have money to burn 40, 50x, well, then you could use Harvest to end up auging crit. This would be a suffix. This would finish out the bow entirely. You could also slam it with an influence mod. There's plenty of other ways that you could attempt to add value. Personally, I just use it as is, as all the other methods are going to be pretty unreliable for what you get. As I remember, the safest thing to do is actually slam it with a Warlord's Exalt and keep trying until you hit that elusive skills fire an additional projectile, which is the big money. So now, you've crafted your best in slot bow. It's absolutely amazing, and you're super happy, right? Well, the damage is certainly improving, and you just need to go over here to the Ballista version, and you need to swap out a low impact support for something that's higher impact. If you can sustain the mana costs, you definitely want to be swapping out Inspiration at this point, which I believe you might be able to do with a Replica Conqueror's Efficiency. You want to put in that nice juicy Empower 4, And man, the damage is just so much better than it was in the past. At 1.76 attack rate, you're not going to be firing the Gatling gun speeds anymore. You're only going to be firing roughly 2 barrages per second, so extremely mobile enemies might feel a little tankier than they actually are. But because you have up to 5 ballistas, and because you're adding 3 plus an additional 3 projectiles, you should have no problem reaching 20 fuses, or if you're using Divergent Explosive Arrow, you should still have no problem reaching the fuse cap of 24. Now, finally, the last thing I want to talk about is upgrading the helmet. I mentioned a little bit about this before. It's much the same way you'd craft an endgame bow. You want to pick what you have from influence mods, and in this case, you're going to be slimming them together with an Awakener's Orb. So to start with, I'm going to say you're using an evasion base still. You don't have to. It's just quite efficient to get a little bit of extra evasion into your build. You want the Explosive Arrow enchant, of course. Attack speed's super good, especially now that we've dropped the Quill Rain. So we just get the attack speed. And the first thing you'd want is a Warlord helmet with enemies have nearby -9. You'd want a nearby -9 helmet with some other random mod, like let's just say it has gain accuracy equal to your strength. You'd then use the orb formerly known as the Maven's Orb, whose name escapes me. And you want to elevate the fire res. So now you have -12 fire res. As you can see, this is already a significant damage boost. It should be noted, if you're struggling with mana, don't do this. Just keep your helmet as the same, as there is a Searing Exarch implicit for reduced mana cost, which would help with this, and it would help you not need the Conqueror's efficiency. But I'm just going to pretend for now that mana is fine, since hopefully if you've been following to this point, you'll be able to solve your mana issues the same way you solve the Chaos Res issue or any other issue with this build. So for this, I'm going to pick Shaper Influence. The reason for Shaper Influence is we want 2 suffixes. Slamming something together with 2 suffixes makes it infinitely easier later, and you can have nearby enemies take 9% increased elemental damage, which is an elevated shaping mod. I'm going to say that you don't really get too lucky. Obviously, hitting Dex is really bad. Hitting Int would be good. Spell Suppression would be good. Let's just say you end up with a mediocre single res. Something that you're not mad about because you don't have to redo it, but not something you're happy about either. From here, you have the perfect suffixes to keep crafting. You'd use something like suffixes cannot be changed for 2 exalts. If you want +2 AoE gems to boost the level of your auras, that's a Veiled mod, so you'd be doing the exact same thing with a Veiled Chaos. You could also use Harvest for Reforged Life to get a higher life roll. I'm going to save a Veiled mod. Be very careful. If you add projectiles pierce an additional target, you'll completely brick your build, so don't do that. From here, we craft Life. Maybe you even get lucky and you slam it and you hit. And no, let's just say some evasion rating. And so we have a significant helmet upgrade that's a true endgame item. It's a lot better than what we had, and we of course introduced a new problem to the build, which is you're no longer fire res capped. Luckily, that's an easy fix. Using the magic of Harvest res swaps, it works kind of just like that. Now, the build's in a much better place. It has higher damage, it has what is arguably a best-in-slot weapon, best-in-slot amulet, best-in-slot helmet, and hopefully from here, you'd have the knowledge to continue to upgrade your gear, to continue to look at parts that are either in need of replacing, or that can be replaced to solve a problem. Now that I've given some examples about how I'd upgrade Explosive Arrow, you can find this PoB down in the description below. Remember, even if you're not playing this build, even if you're not playing anything remotely similar, you can apply a lot of the principles. Look at problems you're running into. If you clear maps super quickly, kill bosses almost instantly, and never die, then you probably don't need to upgrade your gear. Any further min-maxing will be to make big number go bigger and not serve any practical purpose. But when you die, or you feel like your single target damage isn't up to par, or maybe your clear is a bit slow, these are the things that you have to look at and say, that is my problem, what can I do to solve it? It might not be easy. You might not have the answers right at your fingertips, especially if you don't play too much. That's where you can do research, look at what other people are doing, look at build guides, or even just search around on Reddit for answers for questions people had, like, how does Lightning Arrow work? Remember, your focus shouldn't be, I need exactly this item. I need to go from A to B to C, and that's how I progress my character. When you start thinking like that, you'll end up saying, wait a minute, my character's 1 dex short. The build doesn't work. This is a failure. I don't know what to do. When the reality is, maybe you just put dex on your gloves as a suffix. Maybe you change around a jewel and drop a little crit multi and get your dex. Maybe you repath and you lose nothing. There's a lot of ways to attack a problem. Very often, most problems have multiple solutions. Some will be better, and maybe others will be more cost efficient. You shouldn't get too hung up on specifics. You should try to keep yourself open for as many options as possible, and be flexible with your thinking. Unique items are very simple, because it's a nice square peg for a square hole. Sometimes, crafting rares can feel like fitting a round peg into a square hole, where you feel like you're failing when you're actually not. And if you're crafting, don't just look at what you need, look at what someone else might use. If you're using Essence of Envy to roll really nice gloves, and you need life on them, but they happen to roll almost perfect DS, well, there's a low-life build out there that could absolutely use those, so you shouldn't roll over them. You should sell them. This will make your upgrade process a lot more efficient. You won't think about, oh, I just spent 4x upgrading my items and I failed to get anything. That's a complete waste of my time and money. You'll think, oh, I spent 4x on essences to upgrade my items, and now I have 6x. I can buy even more essences. This is often how I'm able to keep pushing my builds forwards, even when I don't have time to farm because I'm making videos. I get to craft for a bit, sit in my hideout, and by the time things are all said and done, I've turned a handy profit. And also remember, when it comes to making your own builds, if you just say, I must use exactly these items, I must be doing this on this class for this aesthetic, then you're going to create more barriers to entry rather than fix them. You're going to be playing super hard mode because oftentimes your build's being held back by you, not by anything in the game. If you enjoy that challenge, that's fine. But if you feel like you're struggling, like you're unable to make a build for yourself, that's probably why. Instead, look at mechanics. A good example of this is, let's say you're a Righteous Fire build. Righteous Fire clears really well, but it doesn't have very good single target. Now some people said, oh, I want to combine Righteous Fire and Death Soth, which is a problem because Righteous Fire scales off of your life, it scales off of fire damage over time, and it's an aura around you that clears well and struggles at single target. Death Soth is chaos damage, meaning you now can't use increased damage of a specific type to scale your build. It's also scaled by aura effect, but not max life, so you can't use that either. And finally, it clears well, but lacks single target. You're not fixing any problems there, you're just doubling down on what you already do. If you instead say, well, what has really good single target, but doesn't necessarily clear, that could also scale off damage over time? Then you might come to something like Fire Trap, or even Flame Wall. Maybe Scorching Ray is more your deal. All of these things work really well with Righteous Fire, because they all offer solutions to the problem of single target, and they're all scaled in a similar manner. When you focus mechanics first, that's how your build succeeds. When you think about upgrades as solving problems, and you look at an incremental approach, while also still remaining open to just buy a large upgrade, then you'll have the best success. But now, I open the question to you. Have you ever struggled to upgrade your build, and if so, has this video provided some clarity? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below, especially as this video was quite long to make, and took a lot more editing time than I expected. Thank you for watching, and again, a special thanks to my patrons and YouTube channel members. If you want to support me, you can do so by clicking the links down in the description below, or on screen right now. You can also support by making purchases through my Nexus page. Or if you just want to chill and hang out, be sure to join the Discord. Again, links for everything are down in the description below. Thank you, and have a great day.